Guys, so this is AP World History, Chapter 2, Part 2 of Mesopotamia. The title of this is The Formation of Complex Society and Sophisticated Cultural Traditions. So this should be pretty quick because it just really talks about developments that occurred and the type of society, the type of people that were there. So let's get started. It starts with economic specialization and trade. So it talks to you about the entrance of bronze and iron. So in the beginning, what they really used for tools and weaponry was bronze. And this became a specialized labor because people started to create military weapons for tools, created agricultural weapons for tools. So the invention of bronze came first, and like I said, it was used for those purposes. Later on, though, iron will replace bronze because it will be the metal of choice. It will be stronger, it won't be as flimsy, and it will be more vital to military. So these are examples of iron weaponry that we see here and how they used it for various methods, not just military, but also for agriculture. So the next thing we're going to look at is the wheel. Yes, the wheel was invented during this time by the Sumerians. Efficient means of transportation using wheeled vehicles and sailing ships. You got to think, what does the wheel do now? It pretty much does the same thing that it did back then. It allowed you to move from place to place at a faster, easier rate. You had wheeled carts that began to develop and wagons as well, and that helped with carrying heavy loads. So people were no longer having to limit themselves in the amount of stuff that they could carry. They could now carry large amounts of goods across large areas of land. And the wheel will diffuse to other lands. It'll move into China, it'll move into India, it'll move into Egypt as well. So this is an example of what some of the first wheels look like, artifacts of the first wheels, and how they would use them to help them in various means of transportation or to get goods from one place to the other. The other thing that it talked about is shipbuilding and trade. So the Sumerians used a watercraft to go into the Persian Gulf, and they really traded with civilizations that were around them. They weren't going out into the ocean and trading in that sense. They were just kind of staying near the land, what they knew, so they wouldn't actually get lost. So Mesopotamians traded with people in all areas. They traded with Egyptians, they traded with people in India. And a lot of times the families operated and organized these businesses. So it was like a family affair where this was the trade that you took on, shipbuilding and trading networks. So these are just some small artifacts of what they found, of what they think some of the ships look like. They found these in the tombs of one of the kings. So just small, but again, it gives the idea that yes, ships did exist during this time. And then, of course, we can also see it when we see it painted on various statues. And then lastly, here is kind of like the travel route, the commercial network of the Phoenicians that were there. So again, you can see they stay along the coast. They stay usually in the seas and stuff. They don't go any further than that. So here is your discussion question. Number 6, why is development of technology important to the economy? So why was the wheel important? Why were the ships important? Why was bronze and iron important to the economy? All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is the emergence of a stratified patriarchal society. So stratified, you just need to know that means like there's levels, okay? There's a structure to it. Patriarchal, by now, that you should know that, and that means that men are in charge. So we see specialized labor and trade is going to lead to more wealth. So it's not about you farming anymore. It's about you being able to perform and have another trade that you can offer to people. Kings and nobles, they were considered offspring of the gods. They had that connection to the gods, and they also focused on special projects. And they also, to show how strong they were, they had a lot of lavish capital cities, and they promoted a high status. So you would go in and, all the monumental art was there to show the strength of not only the civilization, but of the king as well. Very often you had priests that were allied with the kings, and the priests it was their job to make communication with the gods, to ensure good fortune for the community. That was their job. And the temples would generate income as well. So The temples were not just the place where you go and worship or make sacrifice, but they were sometimes seen as banks, where you could store the wealth. They would also lend money for people to go on trading ventures, like maybe they needed money to go off and trade into a different area. They would lend them the money, and of course, they would also help those in need. Other classes that you see are the free commoners, and these are people that kind of, they had their own land, but they weren't making a lot of money. Dependent clients, those were the ones that usually owed a debt, so they would work off their debt, on the land. And then, of course, slaves were usually like prisoners of war, people who couldn't pay off their debt. So, oh, sorry. What we see here is just kind of that stratified society where you have the high priest and the nobles at the top. Underneath them are the officials and the scribes. Then you have craftsmen, and then the servants, the laborers, and the peasants. And again, if we're looking at Mesopotamia, the social hierarchy, it would go king, priest, scribes, merchants, artisans, commoners, slaves. So like I said, in terms of slaves, they were often prisoners of war, convicted criminals, or the heavily indebted. A lot of the times, it's not like they were doing hard labor. Sometimes, yes, they were doing hard labor, but sometimes they were also servants at home. So they worked in the home depending on what they needed, what the person who owned them needed. And sometimes their owners would grant them freedom as a gift to them. So these are just images of monumental art that show the slaves that were there. More monumental art showing the existence of slaves and how they used them for hard labor. The next thing we see is a patriarchal society. And again, you just need to know that patriarchal means that men rule. So in terms of Mesopotamia, they're not only going to rule publicly, but they're going to rule privately. They made decisions for their families. They would arrange marriages between sons and daughters. And sometimes they could sell family into slavery if they weren't happy with their son or daughter. And often, in terms of public policy, they were the ones that made the decisions. In terms of women's roles, at times women always, were the behind the scenes in pretty much all of these empires that we're going to look at. They were the ones that advised the kings and government. They gave suggestions, and they were listened to most of the time by their king. They obtained education and they could work as scribes as well. So especially if you were wealthy, this was something that was granted to you. Virginity of a bride was also important in terms of a woman, the idea that you want that purity there. And in Mesopotamia, there was no casual socializing of married men and women. It just was frowned upon. It looked bad. I mean, why is a married man going to be talking to a woman? And up to 1500 BCE, they wore veils. All right, so the next thing is the development of the written culture, and that comes with the cuneiform writing. So these were symbols to represent sound, syllables, and ideas, and they're wedge shaped. So very hard to make out if you don't know what it means. In terms of education, there was pretty much vocational education where you're going to learn the trade, but there were also formal schools, especially for those who were in government positions, like priests, lawyers, scribes. And there was writing to communicate complex ideas about the world, God, humans, and the relationship. That was really important to them, to have those connections and to reflect on, how am I as a human connected to God, and how is that relationship affecting the world? So right here, this is an example of the cuneiform writing. You can see the wedge shapes that it's embedded into the clay tablet. And then this is a deciphering of what the letters mean. Next comes astronomy and mathematics. And this is just really important for agriculture, for farming. As they were developing the astronomy and mathematics, they began to recognize the best times to plant, the best times to harvest. They were also able to divide, the year into 12 months, and 60 minutes in an hour, and 60 seconds would be a minute. And this example of the calendar that they would use in order to determine the seasons. This is the zodiac circle. And then again, just monumental art showing, the use of calendar. Next, we have the written cultural traditions, especially the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is probably the most well known piece of writing for Mesopotamia. And the themes of this writing are friendship, the relationship between human and God, life, and the meaning of death as well. And these were like those issues that they thought about all the time in this area. You know, what is the meaning between life and death? What is the relationship I have between myself and the God, and how does that affect others? And the principle, it was a principal vessel for moral issues. So this is what the monumental art is for the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then just a cartoon that kind of really in a hurry explains it. Okay, so discussion question 7: in what ways did culture help to promote advancement in Mesopotamian civilization? So all this stuff, the writing, the artwork, the formal schooling that they have, how does that advance the society? How does that make the society better? So your big takeaways for this section is one, that Mesopotamia was highly stratified. It was a patriarchal society. Men were in charge, and you did what the man said. The other thing are the inventions that you need to take away: the bronze, the wheel, the shipbuilding. Um, those are all things that helped to advance Mesopotamia. In terms of culture, you need to think of the writing that existed, the roles of women that were there, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and how that played a role in the relationships that you see. So the next video will be on the broader influence of Mesopotamian society, and we'll move away from just the people living in Mesopotamia and discuss the people who came in and influenced Mesopotamia.